Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTGO codes, check out the Potown store. They've got everything you need. You can even get yourself a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be looking at the entirely revealed Sword and Shield sets from Japan. They're being released on the 6th of December over in Japan, and for us, it's going to be part of our Sword and Shield set in Feb. Now, I already started to talk about VMAXs in a bit more of a general discussion in a previous video, but today we have much more scope as the full sets have been revealed. So I'm going to do what I normally do and jump down to the trainer cards, talk about those first, and then we will talk about the Pokemon that are being introduced from this new set, and I'll be going over what I like, what I don't like, all that good stuff. So we'll start off with the Sword trainers and supporters and such. Starting off with Evolution Incense, you get to search your deck for an evolution, reveal it and put it into your hand. This is obviously very good. It's a big upgrade to Evo Soda, which is like a previous trainer that we've had. Why is this an upgrade from Evo Soda? Because it goes straight to hand, so it's more flexible. It can just be a deck thinning tool, and at the same time, it means that you can use this in Stage 2 decks, whereas Evo Soda was pretty much terrible in Stage 2 decks, because it would make you go through the middleman. So Evolution Incense obviously has great synergy with Rare Candy and such. So yeah, Evolution Incense, excellent. No drawback trainer card for getting evolutions into play. They are trying to push evolutions a decent amount, I think. Some of the Stage 2 stuff is going to be some of the main topics that we talk about today. Also, there's some decent Stage 1s in this set. I think there is some promise for even non-GX evolution Pokemon in this set. So Evolution Incense is definitely a big card. There's even things like, you know, Meganium, Swampert decks that died out as soon as we ran out of Ball Search, and maybe they're worth looking into again because of Evolution Incense. So yeah, pretty cool to see this card come back into the game. Well, you know, Ball Search come back into the game. We have Hyper Potion. It allows you to discard 2 energy from one of your Pokemon if you do heal 120 damage from that Pokemon. So think of this as 2 Super Potions wrapped into one card. Super Potion never really saw a lot of play, but this massive amount of heal, as we've seen with Malolana, is pretty valuable. I think, really, because of that big energy discard, it's going to be quite niche where this can see play. Maybe decks that can naturally recover energies onto themselves, or things like, you know, Rain Dance effects, stuff like that, can get away with Hyper Potion. But oftentimes, Malolana is probably going to be the more mainstay, I would say. But this card does still seem reasonable to me. Fishing Rod, after being mistranslated originally, seems to be an absolutely stellar card. It allows you to shuffle up to 2 Pokemon and up to 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. The reason why I stress up to for both of those counts is you can choose less. If there's only one good thing that you want to recycle back into your deck, you can just say, yeah, I just want this one Pokemon, forget the rest of the stuff that is in my discard pile, but I don't want to jank out my deck, so I'll leave them. But at the same time, this is, you know, 2/3 of a Brock's Grit. It's a bit more limited in that it has to be 2 Pokemon and has to be 2 basic energy. You can't fiddle around with those counts much more. But in terms of the raw recovery potential, this is 4 cards in 1 getting back into your deck. So it has, you know, really improved on Super Rod, where when you want it to be specific pieces, you're less clunky in the late game. And if it's a scenario where you need to get back a bunch of stuff, again, pushing non-GX, pushing evolution-style decks, this gets you a lot of stuff back for 1 card. So this seems like a very, 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 very valuable and powerful trainer for all sorts of decks. We have Rotom Bike. It allows you to draw until you have 6 in your hand, and then your turn ends. I think ultimately this is kind of too slow. This will probably remind a lot of you of Tropical Beach. Beach was a stadium that allowed both players to end their turn by drawing up to 7. The sort of issue with this Rotom Bike is, of course, you know, it's kind of more janky than a Tropical Beach, because Beach, even in like that mid to late game, was at least a stadium bounce for you, whereas this Rotom Bike is basically unplayable outside of like turn 1. Do bear in mind that the Sword and Shield rule change will be coming into effect, where the player going first may not use supporter cards. So this may be some sort of safeguard around that, getting you a few cards here and there. But overall, I don't think it's stronger than the other options that we have. Normally, Ball Search for Dedenne seems fine. Also things like Acrobike and all this other stuff that we can play is going to probably outshine the Rotom Bike. I don't think this naturally seems that powerful to me. We have Giant Charm. It's a tool that gives the Pokemon it's attached to 30 more hit points. Simply strong, I think. A nice HP buff is cool. I think it competes with things like Choice Helmet. We've seen how that can be relevant for keeping things out of range. Obviously, Choice Helmet doesn't cover non-GXs and doesn't cover the new V cards or V Maxes. So Giant Charm is more universal help around the board. So I imagine this could be the new means of tanking that we have available in the game. And it just seems, again, like a good option to have in the game to keep your stuff out of range. We have Air Balloon, which reduces the retreat cost of the Pokemon it's attached to by 2 colorless, which is pretty awesome. It's not quite the effect of Float Stone, because, you know, obviously we're finally punishing the very, very heavy stuff in the game. But for most reasonably sized Pokemon, you're going to give them a free retreat, which is really nice. Overall, I think this card won't see as much play as Floatstone initially, just because so many decks are Jirachi reliant that you'd rather play switches, even though Switch is like a one-time use deal. Switches are just so much better when you're able to Stellar Wish more times and still play skateboards. So as good as Air Balloon is, it's almost Floatstone, which was an excellent card. I think the amount of Jirachi engines right now will keep this limited to just like a number of decks, similar to how U-Turn Board really isn't a bad card, but really doesn't see a lot of play. Air Balloon kind of fits that category for right now until Jirachi engines sort of stop being a thing, I would say. Lumberry removes special conditions from the Pokemon this card is attached to, then it gets discarded. That's pretty weak, I would say. Normally switching effects are stronger in general, and this is, you know, status isn't really plaguing the game right now, but it's a cool card to have if it is going to be a problem. We have Professor Magnolia here. As you can see, it's titled Professor's Research. I do talk in a previous video about my sort of theory around this. But for now, all we do know is that this is called Professor's Research, and then it's Professor Magnolia. You discard your hand, then draw 7. Obviously, it's a powerful effect. Obviously, this is an amazing supporter to have in the game. Lets us dig deep into our deck, lets us get rid of stuff, and we have it in the same set as an excellent recovery piece. So we can more freely just throw away stuff, knowing that we can recycle at least the Pokemon and energy side of things with those fishing rods. So Professor's Research looks excellent. We have Bede, a supporter that allows you to attach a basic energy from your hand to one of your benched Pokemon. This seems just strong enough that it might see play in a handful of decks. I don't think this is an inherently powerful supporter effect. We've seen a bunch of supporters fail that try and attach energies from hand, and obviously Bede is competing with Welder, but Bede is universal, so there might be homes for it yet. I feel like it is stronger and more guaranteed than an Ends Resolve, for example. An ADP sometimes can feel slow, so as we've sometimes seen things like 2 copies of Ends Resolve go into decks, we could easily start seeing a Bede go into decks for similar reasons. To give yourself some guaranteed acceleration this time around without that painful discard of certain cards off the top 6. So I think a potential card for ADP at the very least. And just because it is universal acceleration, I feel like there may be other homes for this card as well. But I think in a vacuum, the card doesn't seem that strong. Oftentimes you'd rather have like Pokemon doing your acceleration or going about it in different ways. But this is an option that we have with literally every deck going forward. So it's a cool card, even though it is on the sort of simple side and not necessarily too inherently strong. I'll now jump down to the Shield trainers. We have Quick Ball. As I just said, the Evolution Incense is great for evolutions, but Quick Ball is broken for basics. You get to discard 1 from hand to search your deck for a basic and put it straight into your hand. That is really insane. Obviously, Cherish Ball has been a big card in the game. Cherish Ball can't grab your VMAXs or your V Pokemon. Obviously, Quick Ball can't get the Maxes either. But it can get those V Pokemon, so every new sort of Sword and Shield attacking deck probably going to be looking to play Quick Ball. Obviously, this has that extra synergy of being able to grab Dedenne to your hand in order to get yourself a fresh hand with its coming into play effect. This doesn't put things straight into play like a nest ball. It goes straight to your hand, which is awesome. Discard synergy is good for things like Mewtwo, obviously, and again, like Malamar. Even though they play treasures, I think they'll still easily be playing for quick balls for extra discard synergy, which is pretty sweet. I think in general, quick ball is awesome. Obviously, it's also good for non-GX decks, who have also been calling out for ball search, so everyone is happy that quick ball is in the game. I think this is just an excellent card. It is comparable to Ultra Ball in that in non-GX decks, it's strictly, in non-evolving decks, it's strictly better than Ultra Ball. And in decks that have an element of evolving, it's still very, very strong. And it's just going to be a 4-of in all sorts of decks going forward, I would say. We have a reprint of Candy. Obviously, the base sets oftentimes have a lot of these staple reprint cards. We have Metal Saucer, a very powerful trainer card we get from the set, allowing us to attach a metal energy from our discard pile to one of our benched metal Pokemon. There are some very powerful metal-type Pokemon that we'll look at from this set that can really take advantage of this sort of item acceleration. As we've just said, Bede is bad because it's a supporter acceleration from the hand. This is acceleration from the discard pile in a trainer. We've just seen some great discard synergy cards that will be played in pretty much every deck. So Metal Saucer shouldn't be too difficult to activate early on in the game, and will give the metal stuff great acceleration, which is awesome. We have Citrus Berry. At the end of each player's turn, if the Pokemon has at least 3 damage on it, you can heal 30 and then discard this card. I think in general, this lines up pretty poorly to the Giant Charm that we saw in the Sword set, because the Giant Charm keeps you out of range of being 1-hit KO'd, as well as providing essentially a heal of 30, I should say. So the Berry doesn't give you that sort of keeping yourself out of 1-hit KO range. It just has a heal effect, which is much, much weaker, I would say. We have Fine Band, which allows your active Pokemon, the Pokemon this is attached to, do 10 more to your opponent's active. It's a decent damage buff. Obviously, it's half as good as Muscle Band, but that can still sometimes be relevant. As long as 10 damage is a relevant number, this is a fantastic tool for you. We have Lucky Egg. This is a reprint card from, I want to say, Platinum Arceus. You are able to draw until you have 7 cards in your hand if a Pokemon is knocked out by damage from the your opponent's active Pokemon. So it gives you a bit of card draw. I think what's interesting, obviously Lucky Egg never really saw play back in the day. But in a sort of reset stamp meta, this card is actually a little bit more intriguing, especially with tag teams where oftentimes we commit so many energies to like our new VMAXs and our tag teams. We basically just power up the one guy, and if someone knocks out a big threat, like gets rid of 4 energies in play, takes a big 3-prize swing all at once, and stamps you down to like 1 or 2 cards, it can easily like swing a game. And Lucky Egg is a great defense against that. It's like having a Zebra on board. It's like drawing off of Reset Stamp and hitting a Dedenne. So Lucky Egg is actually pretty powerful. I think more powerful than it was, just like in the format that it's in. Lucky Egg seems like a stronger card. So as a sort of stamp proofing mechanism, this is something that's maybe worth looking into. I do think we have a decent amount of powerful tools already in the game. Obviously getting extra health buff, potential extra damage buff. These may take priority over Lucky Egg, but this is like a trainer means of stamp proofing yourself, which sounds very, very awesome. It at the very least forces your opponent to gust around the Lucky Egg, as well as stamp you, and forces them to find more pieces. So I think where this card was pretty poor in previous formats, it seems a lot stronger now that we have Reset Stamp being so influential in the outcome of games. So I think that's not a card to sleep on, despite the previous era where it's been terrible. We have Team Yell Grunt. Put an energy from your opponent's Pokemon into their hand. It's an anti-tempo card rather than a control piece. I think, control decks will usually just play Will plus Crushing Hammer combo. So Team Yell, not quite like ideal for those sorts of players. Maybe an anti-tempo card is good enough. Think about doing this against things like ADP in those opening turns. It can be insane. We've seen how like Lugia GX has been played in Gardevoir Sylveon to try and just remove their threat before they start ultimate rain to stuff, or remove a threat that you're worried about. If you can just team Yell Grunt for a few turns and slow them down, you can just start swinging into stuff. That could be really awkward for them. So anti-tempo is still a decent card and something to be concerned about. Overall, though, I don't think it's like insanely strong. I think there's going to be a lot of energy accelerators in the later sets, so I think there won't be that much need for this card. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite niche. We have Marnie, a phenomenal supporter from the set, saying that both players shuffle their hands without looking, and then put their shuffled hands to the bottom of their decks, and then you get to draw 5, your opponent gets to draw 4. It's essentially a broken judge effect where you know that you're not going to be drawing back into any of those cards that were not playable at the time, and you get yourself a fresh 5, so you see 5 brand new cards on your own end with no risk of drawing back into the cards you just put to the bottom, and you're forcing your opponent into a fairly low hand size of 4. So yeah, it seems powerful. Good defense, decent for your own hand refresh, helping you dig a little bit deeper into the deck than a Judge would. So this pretty much outclasses Judge in most categories, to be honest. So yeah, seems like an excellent card for certain. We also have Aurora Energy. It is a special energy that provides 1 of every single energy at a time, very similar to Rainbow. But rather than doing 1 damage to yourself, in order to play this card, you need to discard a card from your hand. Now, that's usually seen as a downside, but there are plenty of decks out there that would love to have discard synergy. The first one that comes to mind is, of course, Mewtwo and Mew, Tag Team GX. They love binning as many Pokemon as possible and thinning out their hand, and Aurora Energy can do exactly that. Also, there are going to be those decks that would prefer this over Rainbow just because of certain damage breakpoints that you hit by taking 1 damage counter. Again, I go back to Mewtwo Mew just because it's the most obvious answer that this is going into that deck. But going down to 260 hit points can be very scary against things like Giratina hitting you. It can be very scary against like Pikarom if they had double Electro Power. It's just 1 less thing they need. It's 1 less fire energy for an Infinity attack. It's all sorts of things that sort of get pushed into range just from that 1 damage counter. So Aurora Energy seems like an excellent card for Mewtwo, and possibly a bunch of others as well, if they have decent discard synergy on their own end. Alright, so that's the trainers out the way. We can now sort of look at these Pokemon, knowing that we have decent ball search for both basics and evolutions. We know that there's some good discard synergy cards in Quick Ball and Magnolia. We know that there's some hand disruption elements out there. So those are the things that we can sort of keep in mind. We know that there's good metal energy acceleration. We know that we have good Pokemon recovery. This is all stuff we can bear in mind as we discuss the Pokemon now, because those are all influential. Starting off with some of the grass stuff, we are going to be skipping the sort of lame cards and going straight to the highlights, really. I'll look at every V and VMAX Pokemon no matter how good they are, and we'll start off with Delmise V. It's a 220 hit point grass type. It is weak to fire, and fire is probably still going to be relevant. It does have a 2 retreat cost and 2 attacks. The first is Wrath of Wraths. You do 30, and if any of your grass Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during their last turn, this attack does 90 more damage. So that's 120 sort of revenge style attack. Think about Flippity Flap Shaman. It's basically that attack, but for only grass Pokemon, but for only 1 energy as the upside. So it's a lot faster of a response time, and 120 for 1 is relatively efficient. Think about things like First Impression and Riotous Beating being decent numbers. Obviously, times are changing. 120 is not even 2-hit KOing tag teams or VMAX Pokemon, not even close to VMAXs. So it can sort of help you tee off and get into Giga Hammer range, but it's not necessarily the best damage in the world. It does have the second attack though, Giga Hammer, doing 20, and you can't use Giga Hammer during your next turn. Sorry, not 20, it does 200. 200 is a decent number. It knocks out some basic VMAXs, knocks out a decent number of basic GXs. Obviously, it gets the Dene GX in one shot and such. I think something like the Fine Band could be a good include on this Dhelmise. 210 does hit a lot more of the basic V Pokemon. Again, not quite all of them, but that's something to bear in mind. I think, of course, there is the Rillaboom in the set that we'll talk about that can help accelerate grass types very nicely. But overall, I think this isn't really a big enough payoff for a Rillaboom deck. Possibly a one-of in Rillaboom. Just like if your opponent just happens to like knock out your early Grookey and you're not able to get acceleration going, you at least have Wrath of Wraths to put some counters into play and help you like redevelop Grookeys and such. So maybe this is going to be like a one-of in a Rillaboom style deck, but overall I don't think he's going to be like the main man for that sort of archetype. Here is the Rillaboom. So we have the Grookey, Thwackey, and the Stage 2 Rillaboom. Not much to say about the evolving stuff, but Rillaboom is a 170 hit point Stage 2, which is pretty tanky for a one prizer. And we have Voltage Beat. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 Grass Energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon. Then shuffle your deck. So essentially, think about Vikavolt, where it was just 1 Lightning, 1 Grass. Rillaboom now doing it for just pure Grass Energies, which does, in theory, limit some of your attacking options. But it's allowing you to just play 1 type of energy card, which is very beneficial for you. Think about Vikavolt having to have an awkward split of like 7-5, and once you use like your first 2 or 3 uses of Vikavolt, you might be running out of like Lightning Energies or Grass Energies, whatever the lower count you have in the deck was, and it really puts a strain on you finding like energy recyclers and stuff earlier on. So Voltage Beat is much more usable just because you have pure 1 type of energy in your deck. You can use Voltage Beat 3 times and you're still probably going to have 4 or 5 energies still in your deck at that point after that. So yeah, I think this Voltage Beat ability is great. There are some decent receivers of acceleration. I think things like VMAX Snorlax may definitely want to be paired alongside Rillaboom just to get some acceleration going. Obviously, Snorlax has all the options available to it. It could be welded onto, it could be triple acceleration, so it doesn't have to go alongside Rillaboom, but it's an option for you for sure. And I'm sure there will be other options out there for this card. I think there are a bunch of other accelerators in this set, so Rillaboom isn't like a standalone crazy card, because we have a Stage 1 that gives us great acceleration, and we obviously have the Metal Saucer, which is a trainer-based acceleration, so we're in a weird spot where we're being spoilt for acceleration options. Obviously, Malamar's still in the format. We have things like ADP and Pikarom. So I don't think this is like outstanding and is filling a gap in the market because we have so much acceleration around. But we have Rosa to try and get this guy into play quite efficiently. We have all sorts of ball search options now to help us get to this man quickly as well. So yeah, I think it definitely could see play. It may be sort of lying in wait for a new busted Grass V or V Max to come out. Just like Vikavolt did, we kind of waited a few sets for Vikavolt to really do anything. We might be in the same spot for Rillaboom, really. We will move on to some fire stuff. Unfortunately, there's nothing too interesting there, so we will skip down to the water stuff, starting off with Lapras V. It's a 210 hit point basic Pokemon. Obviously, the Vs are 2 prize Pokemon. It has the Wave Back attack. For colorless energy, you discard a water from your hand to this Pokemon. Oh, sorry, discard. You attach an energy from your hand to this Pokemon, then switch it with one of your benched. So yeah, that's decent. It's a little bit of extra help, bit of acceleration. Going to the bench, now that we've seen Frostmoth, is actually way, way, way more relevant as well. I can certainly see Lapras V and VMAX being paired with Frostmoth, because this is a fantastic new water type that we have in the set. And Frostmoth wants to accelerate from the bench, so this wave back attack is way better than I originally thought, because it can help you throw up a single prize Pokemon or something like that, throw up like a Victinian, or not a Victinian, what am I saying, a Jirachi into the active, and protect this guy, and most importantly put it on the bench for you to accelerate with a Frostmoth on a future turn. So that wave back, an excellent synergistic attack for the deck that I'm seeing it in, really. We also have Ocean Loop. It does 210 and return 2 water from this Pokemon to your hand. 210, a decent number. It can knock out a decent number of basic V Pokemon. It can knock out Dedenne and such. And previously I wasn't too excited about this attack, but now that I've seen Frostmoth, I certainly am. This is a great regular V Pokemon attack, so that this archetype doesn't simply get walled by Zamazenta, so that's excellent. As we move into the Lapras VMAX, certainly will be played alongside the Lapras V. This isn't like good enough on its own. You want to be able to go straight into this guy because you get a buff up to 320 hit points, which is pretty sizable. You do become a 3 prizer when you do VMAX, but you do have the G-Max pump available to you. You do 90 and 30 more for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. So that's 180 for the requisite 3, but if you start stacking more and more, obviously the scales up. 180 already enough to knock out Dedenne. 210 with that extra energy is good enough to knock out a good number of V Pokemon. And obviously just the requisite damage is doing enough to 2-shot VMAXs. And if you really do go haywire with a bunch of energies, it could close out the game against stuff if you really do just slam a bunch on with your Frostmoth spam. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. Things like Fisherman come to mind. Things like Misty and Lorelei potentially, or Lady to get a bunch of energies out, just that you can start rain dancing them into play. Could be insane. So yeah, the Lapras VMAX seems like it's just naturally going to be an archetype, and a very strong one I think from this set. This paired with Frostmoth just seems to be a match made in heaven, really. For other Pokemon in the water types, we have a very, very interesting Inteleon line. I am super hyped for this line. When I first saw the Inteleon, I thought this ability was going to sort of go to waste. But fortunately, Drizzile has come in and saved the day, because we have a very awesome Stage 1 here. It's a 90 hits point Stage 1 that has the ability Shady Business. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, during your turn you can search your deck for one trainer card, reveal it and put it into your hand. So for simply evolving into a Stage 1 Pokemon, we get a Skylar effect. That is insane! A Skylar effect on an ability, on just a non-GX Stage 1 is nuts. The ability itself in a vacuum is stronger than Tapu Lele, because it also has access to stadiums and trainer cards. So man, this can get you so many goodies, which is awesome. And the best thing is, this is just a springboard. Like, he doesn't stop there. You then gain access to the Inteleon, which when he evolves, Shading Dealings allows you to search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So I can definitely foresee something like 2/2/2 lines of Inteleon going in decks. If you have space, even thicker, just because these guys, with such great Pokemon search that we have in the game, and Pokecoms being like decent cards in a whole bunch of decks, having these available to you can be awesome. They're going to help you get supporter cards on key turns. They're going to help you get things like custom catchers, which are going to be way more relevant cards, because a great catcher can't pick up V Pokemon, of course, or V Maxes. So custom catcher meta may be coming back. They can grab you things like Reset Stamp. They can grab you all sorts of pieces from your deck. So I think this Inteleon line will be fantastic. I think it's super flexible and will maybe be engines in their own right. I really do believe in these cards. I think they're excellent, excellent cards going forward, that can just be in an array of decks that want to go ahead and tutor specific pieces. Onto the lightning stuff, nothing really jumps out to me. We do have a very, very interesting Gengar. At first I kind of overlooked this card and its potential, but I have been looking into some options that we have with this guy. It has 110 hit points, which is really, really low for Sword and Shield meta Stage 2s, but it does have the Life Shaker ability. As often as you like during your turn, you may move a damage counter from one of your Psychic Pokemon to another of your Psychic Pokemon. So think of Reuniclus being able to move damage all around your board no matter what. This is a little bit more limited in its ability, in that it can only be around Psychic Pokemon. But it's still that damage movement effect, which we know is very, very strong. We can try and pair this up with a good amount of healing options that we have. There's obviously some Indeedee Vs that can heal the active 20 per turn, and they are Psychic types, so they could be receiving damage from, when your big tank in the active, say it's a Mew Mew, say it's a Muck, say it's, some other big tag team psychic type that we have, like Solgaleo Lunala, for example. Like, say it's just one of those guys absorbing hits. You can then Life Shake all those damage off and allows you to commit more energy onto the active as long as you can tank. And you're going to try and take advantage of healing cards. I think one of the most powerful healing cards this can actually take advantage of is Last Chance Potion, believe it or not, because you can Life Shaker away until you have like 10 hit points remaining on something on your bench, then instantly start healing 120s off things. Now, it's not quite as good as Max Potion. It's not as good as like Acerola or AZ or any of those options that we've previously had, which makes me think this Gengar might be a little bit below the bar, especially because there's so much one-hit KO in the format still. We haven't yet got a strong enough Psychic VMAX Pokemon. If we do get a VMAX Pokemon with like, a Psychic one that has like 320 hit points or something, this could start becoming a real threat because you're just going to be sponging so many hits and sort of trying to negate that damage with Life Shaker as much as possible as you commit more and more energies to like a big slaughter sort of guy. So yeah, I think the Gengar's interesting. You can try and fill up your board with a bunch of Psychic types and do things like Champions Festival to Life Shaker all the damage around and then start healing a bunch with Champs Festival. I tried to have a look at a bunch of other things. There aren't that many like sort of board healing options where you can like split it all up between your guys. Like you take a 200 hit and then like you move it onto like 30s of all your stuff and then you just try and do like a rough sea start effect. If we also get one of those sorts of effects for Psychic types, that could be absolutely insane. So I think this ability has a huge amount of potential. I think we're sort of lacking the good enough target for the card right now, the sort of main frontman of a style of deck like this, and we're to some extent lacking a bit of the healing pieces, but I do think this Gengar is super interesting and might be worth building around to some extent, thanks to this Wobbuffet V. I think if this guy is going to work, it might be in conjunction with this card. At first, I was kind of like unimpressed by this guy, but turns out swapping, swapping 210 damage, like you get to heal 210 and deal 210 back to stuff. That is pretty decent. So if we do have, like whatever Psychic Pokemon in the active sponging hits, you can then go onto the Wobbuffet V. You can actually do more than 210. You can, Giant Charm this guy or whatever it is to go up to 250 hit points, and then you can step back and put 240 damage counters on a Pokemon if they have no damage on them, and you just throw them all over to your opponent, which is pretty insane. For that 2 colorless, switch all damage counters on this Pokemon with those on your opponent's active. So here's the combo. You're going to be Life Shaking away damage off of your dude, putting it all onto a Wob V, well, as much as it can take, and then you're just going to gust stuff up and step back onto completely healthy stuff. So you fully heal that damage that you've been soaking up with your other guys, and you're dealing a bunch to your opponent. So pretty spooky attacker. It is 2 colorless, so it's not like the cheapest out there. It might have to be paired with something like Mewtwo possibly. Like Mewtwo could be your tag team and you're using like Solgaleo hits onto stuff for 120 hits. Then you take bigger hits with the Mewtwo, you Life Shake it all off, and then you go into Wobbuffets when you need to. That could be an option for you. So I want to see people get creative with this Wobbuffet V. Step back could be pretty cool. You can also try and trap stuff with Shadow Bind, but I don't think that's like the relevant part of the card. I think the more relevant part is that big step back. It does have a big 3 retreat cost, so it is chunky, but something to bear in mind for sure. That swapping of damage is a pretty cool effect for sure. We have Poltergeist, which is irrelevant. All these fighting types are pretty poor. We do have a very interesting Grapploct. It's a 130 hit point stage 1 with the Octalock attack for 2 fighting. The attacks of your opponent's active require 2 colorless more energy, and it can't retreat. And then this effect, this Octalock effect, lasts until the Grapploct is no longer your active Pokemon. So you only need to Octalock once to establish that Octalock, and then you can move into hard swings to try and... So initially you trap stuff, make it hard for them to attack you whatsoever and move out the way, and then you start using hard swing to actually start, damaging them if you want to damage them. If you just want to trap stuff, you can just Octolock and start passing into people, which could be pretty grim in controlling style builds. Obviously, for 2 fighting energy, it can be reduced by things like the Karate Belt, so that can just be like a 1 attachment plus tool, and suddenly you can be Octolocking things, which is pretty scary, to be honest. I think also you've got to think about things like Omastar, being able to stop people using switches and stuff like that could be interesting. Obviously, we do have things like Malolana in format right now, which can get around Grapple-Oct pretty easily. And if Air Balloon plus Dawn Wings Necrozma becomes a thing, Grapple-Oct is going to be useless. So there are easy ways around this, but still, I feel like some people will be exploring Grapple-Oct, and I'm definitely going to see this guy on the ladder, and I'm going to be trolled by it at some point. We see Stonejourner and Stonejourner VMAX. So the regular Stonejourner V is a 220 hit point basic fighting type. It has guard press. You do 40. During your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 20 less damage. Pushing yourself to 240 is pretty tanky for a 2-prize Pokemon for sure. And that 40 damage isn't irrelevant, I would say. Especially if you're able to push this to 60 with a Diancie Prism, for example. That guard press is going to be very dangerous at knocking out some evolving stuff. And just putting pressure on other V Pokemon and trying to put them in range of things like Max Rockfall later on. So, for example, you're able to Guard Press for 60, and then you're able to Rockfall for 220 with, again, that same buff. That's enough to deal with like tag teams pretty easily in 2 hits. So sometimes Guard Press can do some reasonable math for you in those opening turns, which is cool. Mega Kick does 150 for those 3 fighting. Pretty expensive, but don't forget, again, we have that Karate Belt that can help things out, make things a little bit cheaper. We have more damage buff from things like Dojo as well. The Guard Press with a Diancie and Dojo actually knocks out Jirachi, so this could be, again, pretty relevant with these damage modifiers. So pretty interesting early pressure style card that then comes into a big behemoth, a 330 hit point fighting type that also has a 1 energy attack. Stone Gift allows you to attach a fighting energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon, then heal 120 damage from that Pokemon. So what can be great is that he can be his own accelerator. Obviously, fighting types are lacking acceleration, so you can straight away VMAX and just Stone Gift yourself, heal off some of the damage that you've taken early, and set yourself up for a Max Rockfall on future turns, which does a relatively strong 200 for 3 fighting. We have Diancie buffing this. We have the Dojo potentially buffing this as well. So you're more than likely going to be knocking out regular V Pokemon quite happily. You do hit a relevant typing in being a fighting type, especially against Snorlax VMAX, if that's going to be an archetype, which I think it's probably going to be very strong. So yeah, Stonejourner seems pretty reasonable just on his own. Even if you don't want to be a damaging archetype with this guy, being a 330 hit point Pokemon that can heal 120 from his own attacks, on top of the other healing options that we have in the game with like Malolana and such, again, can be pretty intimidating. So for like literally a walling archetype, this little brick wall could be pretty good. So yeah, I think Stonejourner VMAX looks pretty strong to me. Quick note on some dark type Pokemon, specifically poison types. They've gone back to being, well, for the first time actually, they're going to the dark type category of cards. So you will be seeing a decent number of poison types now being dark. Some of them will have weakness to fighting. Some of them will have other weaknesses as well, like weakness to grass, I think, could be a thing as well for dark types going forward. Toxicroak is pretty subpar. We do have a Nickit with an interesting attack. It's a basic 70 HP Pokemon that has Tempt. Your opponent shuffles the cards into their hand without looking and puts them to the bottom of their deck. Then your opponent draws 3. So putting your opponent to a very low hand size pretty early in the game is actually quite disruptive and pretty awkward to deal with. So I could see this being some sort of disruptive option in controlling decks or just archetypes that are trying to deny big setups. So Nickit is a surprisingly annoying card to deal with, so something I don't want to see a lot of play, but there you go. I thought I'd mention it. We have a Galarian Berserker that obviously evolves from Galarian Meowth. It has the Steely Spirits ability. The attacks of your metal Pokemon do 20 more damage to your opponent's active. It's a nice ability. Obviously, it's stackable as well if you want to really kit out your metal types. and make their damage a lot stronger. So I think we need to look at the most relevant cards that are coming, like the most relevant decks that are coming out of this set, and see if we need this extra damage modification. Sometimes 20 damage is going to be perfect numbers to line up for you. Sometimes you want multiple Berserkers in play. I think that option does finally open itself up just because we finally have like better ball search for these Pokemon. So I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility. People will be using benched Berserkers just to improve the damage output of some of the other interesting V Pokemon that we have from this set in particular. We have a Ferrothorn that doesn't seem very strong, a Galarian Stunfisk that discards energy attached to your opponent's active if this guy takes damage. But I think ultimately this isn't a very strong option. Obviously guaranteed discards is a little bit annoying, but controlling decks really don't have a problem getting rid of energies right now. They can infinite loop Crushing Hammer with a Oranguru once they've finished their Chip lock, so I don't think Stunfisk is necessarily as good as something like a Mareep in those early turns for trying to buy turns off your opponents. I don't think he's that strong overall. We come to Zacian V, I think the strongest Pokemon of the set. It's a 220 hit point metal type basic that has the ability Intrepid Sword. Once during your turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck and attach any number of metal energy cards you find there to this Pokemon and put the other cards into your hand. And then if you do use the ability, your turn does end. So definitely an early game style ability, but certainly a strong one. Potentially just giving you a free draw 3 off of an ability before you pass your turn is pretty insane. And at the same time, you can have those high roll moments of getting an extra attachment in on him, which is pretty sweet. Especially because Brave Blade seems to be a very strong attack in its own right. So we have Intrepid Sword and we have Metal Saucer to help accelerate this guy. So 230 for 3 is very, very efficient when you consider those acceleration tools that we have available to us. During your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. I think that's fine. We're already going to be planning on playing a bunch of healing options, I would imagine. Malolanas to help us switch out of the way. A bunch of switches naturally for like a Jirachi engine that I'm already just considering to be very strong. Because you would much rather Intrepid Sword with a Zacian nice and safe on the bench. And leave like a Stellar Wishing Jirachi active while you power up for Brave Blade. Naturally, the Metal decks want to put their main attackers on the bench so that they can Metal Saucer to things. So Jirachi seems like an obvious solution. So you'll naturally be playing a bunch of switching cards so that you don't have to worry about that Brave Blade not being usable the following turn. So yeah, I think Zacian V 230, a great number. It knocks out basic V Pokemon very easily, and it can be easily two-shotting V Maxes, even if they are using things like Malolana. Doing 460 over 2 turns gets around 1 Malolana heal between those turns and can still knock out a Snorlax V, for example. So yeah, 230, great number. It plays around heal very well, and its ability gives you extra card draw, which you can never hate, and can sometimes give you random acceleration, which is also great for you. So yeah, Zacian V, big thumbs up from me. I think it's an awesome card for sure, and will certainly be the front man in either his own archetype alongside just Zacian and Zamazenta, or could also go alongside ADP. You could just play a higher count of metal energies now and just have like a couple rainbows in there, for example, for the water attachments. Obviously, Keldeo gets way worse in the launch of Sword and Shield because there will be so many attacking V Pokemon that can get through Keldeo so naturally that Keldeo is probably taken out of ADP altogether. And you'll just be playing more metal energies for Zacian and Zamazenta going forward. So just using the GX attack from ADP, opening up Brave Blade to be doing like 260, which is a pretty decent number. Like again, if you go up to 260 with an ADP, then put a fine band on this guy, then you're knocking out tag teams for 3 energy. So yeah, the numbers seem scary right now. Zacian V, very, very strong for sure. We have Cincino, an epic stage 1. Like I said, they've been pushing a decent number of evolutions in this set. The non-evolving, the non-GX, what am I saying? The 1 prizes. GXs are gone. The 1 prizes from this set, which is awesome. We have the ability Thrifty. Once during a turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 2. So it's trade on a lovely little non-GX. So straight away, this is within the conversation of Zeb Striker, Pidgeotto, all those other abilities that help you draw cards, like Mag Cargo as well. Now that we get more Ball Search back for those sorts of cards, they can definitely work their way back into decks for sure. And I think Cinccino obviously lines up pretty well against a good amount of them. If you start flooding your board with Cincinos, you're going to get yourself some great discard synergy and help you get towards big combo pieces and stamp proof yourself, just like we've seen previously with Zoroark. I think you don't have to lose your minds over this card. It's not as good as Zoro, because it is just a bench sitter and is, pretty fragile. But overall, I think it is a very strong card and great to have in the game, especially because it comes with a nice little utility attack. You do Forcey and attach a basic energy from your discard to one of your benched. That's just good. It's good at defending against controlling decks, helping you get more energy back into play. So yeah, Cinccino, big thumbs up from me. A very well designed card, I think. We have Cramorant V. It's a 200 hit point basic that has Beak Catch for a colorless. You get to search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand. So it's very similar to Hooper GX's first attack. And then it has the Spit Shot attack for 3 colorless. You have to discard all energy from this guy, but you do a 160 damage snipe. Well, it can also be to the active, but oftentimes you're eyeing up a Dedenne, right? Let's not beat around the bush. You're just trying to finish off a Dedenne here. I think Dedenne obviously will have a place in the game. I think especially with the turn 1 rule change with supporters, more than ever, we'll be reliant on Dedenne engines, to be honest, to draw us a bunch of cards and get set up if you are the player going first. So Cramorant is going to have ample targets, and he's a colorless Pokemon. So you have a good amount of ways to accelerate those 3 energies just for this guy to be a late game finisher. The thing I do like about this card is that if you happen to start this guy, you at least have Beak Catch to be a useful option for you, even though you'd rather just be trying to use Spit Shot to close a game. So yeah, I think this is like possibly a one-of in like Welder decks, possibly a one-of in a few other acceleration-based builds out there as well, just to help you close out games. I don't think you'll ever build a deck completely around Cramorant, but it seems like a decent one-of if Dedenne sniping is your forte. So we'll skip over the trainers that we've already looked at and look at the shield cards now. We have a stage 2 Orbeetle that has the ability Bug Radar, which is the main interest of this card. Once during a turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck and put them back in any order. So think of Chip Chip Ice Axe, but instead of just having one card put to the side and then your opponent shuffles and then you put that card on top of your choice, you can sort out the top 3. Now that effect is way stronger because you have guaranteed knowledge of what your opponent's next 2 cards are, not only the top 1, right? So in a situation where the second card you give your opponent is also a dead draw, control decks don't have to use Belelba Bryson Man, and they don't have to like shuffle up your hand. That can give them a bit more breathing space for themselves. And in the case of there being 2 good cards and 1 bad card, you just give your opponent the bad card, and then the following turn you know that you can guaranteed Belelba and Bryson Man away the 2 good cards that you've already seen. So this effect compares very well to Chip Chip Ice Axe. Obviously the downside of this card is that you probably don't want to play more than like a 1/0/1 line of him, and also Rare Candy. And of course, control decks are basically petrified of prizing stuff already, so I don't think this will overall replace Chip Chip Ice Axe in some of these control decks, mainly Pidgeotto, right? Just because of the prizing issue of things, but inherently its ability is stronger than Chip Chip, so possibly that could be where its home is. It does have an attack Brainwave. You do 90 plus 30 more times the amount of Psych Energy attached to this guy, which is pretty weak overall. So you basically just play the Orbeetle if you want to be a control deck, and you want to play this over Chip Chips. Another issue with this card as well, as of course, is if your opponent knocks out your Orbeetle or your Blip Bug before you get it established, before you get your lockup, then it's far less versatile than a Chip Chip. So I think ultimately this will fall below the bar for control decks, but certainly an interesting ability. And it's interesting that we've previously had abilities like this on Stage 1 Pokemon. There used to be a Slowking back in Heart Gold Soul Silver. There was a Stage 1 that allowed you to do this effect, but for either yourself or your opponent. So they've been super defensive with this ability, which I think is important just because the amount of control tools that we have. They've been defensive in that they put it on a Stage 2 instead of a Stage 1, and essentially half the utility of the ability, which, yeah, just shows you that they are respecting the control elements of the game. But I think they've been so cautious that it probably won't see play. We then come to Torkoal V. It's a 210 hit point fire-type basic that has the Flame Pillar attack for 2 fire and a colorless, so just a welder and an attach away from doing 90, and then you can discard the top card of your deck. If you discarded a fire, this does 90 more damage. So the potential to do 180 for 3 is pretty decent. We do have some synergy cards that can try and help guarantee that fire energy on top. There's an Oranguru that we haven't yet spoken about from this set that allows you to change a card from your hand with the top card of your deck. So you can, like, as long as you have a fire spare in your hand, you can then swap that with whatever your other card on top of your deck would be to guarantee a Flame Pillar doing 180. But is it worth the work? And does Welder decks have the board space to fit things like a Oranguru into play, just to do a little bit more damage than, say, a Heatran would just of a Welder on its own? I would argue probably not. I think the Flame Pillar is probably too gimmicky. So overall, I'm not too happy with it. Its second attack does 120, and you discard 2 energy from your opponent's active Pokemon for 3 fire and a colorless. Again, I think this is pretty expensive. For the same attack cost, something like a Charizard Breaks In can be helping you do 60 more damage and getting you 3 of the best cards of your deck whenever you want to. So I think overall Torkoal V, again, one of these cards that they've been pretty conservative over. Discarding energy from your opponent's active does seem decent, but there are going to be a number of decks that A, have acceleration, and B, like the Snorlax V deck, they're going to play triple accelerations anyway, so there are plenty of decks that just naturally aren't punished by a big energy discard. So I think that's something you don't have to worry about. I think if you want to tech Ability Zard for ADP, this could potentially be a scary option, similar to how Mewtwo can just for 4 energy do 300 damage and destroy an ADP straight away. For just 1 Welder and 2 manual attachments over 2 turns, you can destroy an ADP's option to Ultimate Ray after they GX attack, which is pretty cool. I think that's like the best utility of this card. If ADP is still like a super important archetype, this could certainly be good. But at the same time, ADP is probably moving over to metal stuff already, so the fire decks naturally have a slightly better time against them. So I don't know how relevant that Torkoal V is going to be. Overall, I don't think it'll be worth the space in Ability Zard-based decks. We have a Cinderace line. Again, nothing too much to say about the basic in Stage 1. But the Cinderace comes with an awesome ability, Libero. Once during a turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to your active, you may attach up to 2 fire energy from your discard pile to this guy. So naturally, it powers itself up turn by turn, which is pretty sweet. As long as you've got enough fires in the discard pile, you can just keep bringing up your Cinderace. Again, things like Jirachi engines immediately spring to mind. When a Cinderace gets knocked out, you can promote Jirachi for turn, and then you can just, draw for turn, do your Stellar Wish stuff, build up your next Cinderace, probably use things like Rosa and whatnot. You can just Rosa, get your next Candy Cinderace, turn attach, and then suddenly you Libero, and you can be straight into a Flare Striker attack, which does 190 and discards 2 fire from this guy. And 190 is a decent number. I think, again, you're knocking out a decent number of basic V and basic GXs. You're 2-shotting VMAX cards, and also you're irrelevant typing in the fact that Zacian Zamazenta is probably going to be a deck in its own right. So, yeah, I think the typing of this card makes it potentially like an anti-meta non-GX deck. I don't necessarily think this is going to be a super strong card in its own right. One cool thing is that it's another option for Chandelure to have in the deck, to just be like an instant reload guaranteed 190 damage. So at the very least, it's a Chandelure card, and at best, it could be its own sort of rogue deck, which is cool. We have a Seeking, and it's a surprisingly interesting card. flip 3 coins for each hedge, discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. I think if we had Flip Teeny in the game, I'd actually be kind of scared of this card. But overall, I'm not too worried because we don't. We have a Quillfish, which isn't too important. And here we go. Here is... Although I think Zacian is the strongest card in the set, I think here is my personal favorite card of the set. Frostmoth as a design is already like one of my favorite Pokemon from Sword and Shield. And it's been given a crazy, crazy ability. It's a stage 1 that has the Ice Dance ability. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a water energy from your hand to one of your benched water Pokemon. So, straight away, it's a stage 1 version of Rain Dance. Now, it's a little bit more limited because you can only attach to water Pokemon and it can only be to benched water Pokemon. But I can't get over the fact that this ability is on a stage 1 for the first time compared to the history of the trading card game. Always Rain Dance being on stage 2s. Always. Literally the first of its kind. Rain Dance on a stage 1. It's genuinely mind-boggling of how big a difference that is. You don't have to fit in candies into your deck. You don't have to high roll candies. So you gain spaces. You're more consistent. And your game plan is way faster as a stage 1. Super, super crazy. We have the Lapras VMAX that we can instantly synergize with this card. Some people have even talked about using it with Quagsire. The main reason to use it with Quagsire is, again, if you are just using water Pokemon, you can throw it onto your active and not have to worry about having pivots and switching cards and stuff. But at the same time, playing the Quagsire means you're not just limited to water Pokemon. You then open the door for all sorts of attackers to take advantage of great acceleration. So, yeah, I think Frostmoth on its own with Lapras is probably going to be a thing. And I think Frostmoth may get a bit more experimental with multiple stage 1s in there as well to have a toolbox of attackers. So I'm honestly blown away by this card. I just can't get over the fact that stage 1 Rain Dance is a sentence that I'm saying in the TCG for the first time ever. Just absolutely nuts. I think it's super crazy good. We move on to Morpeko V. It's a 170 hit point basic type. Basic lightning type. That has Spark. For 1 color, so you do 20 and 20 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. This is basically a Manectric EX Overspark attack, I want to say it is. Overrun, right? And then we have the Electric Wheel for 2 lightning and a color, so you do 150. And discard an energy from this guy, then switch this Pokemon with one of your benched. I don't think this is that good. Obviously, discarding from yourself is a bit of a pain. It means that we already have a 3 energy attack cost, which is a few turns of attachments. And it just means that if ever your opponent does gust up your Morpeko V, you've been spending so many turns reattaching to this guy to continue the Electric Wheel combo that you've not already powered up another Morpeko for future turns. So that discard is the biggest downside of this by far. I do like having a powerful hit-and-run style attacker. We've previously seen hit-and-runs be very conservative on the damage side of things, like Swordsbuck for 60, Hitmonchan for 30. We've been very... the Pokemon trading card game's been very defensive about how they use hit-and-run style Pokemon. This is a very high damage output hit-and-run style effect, but it does come with a hefty downside in its own right. So I think it's probably going to be just below the bar. It does come with a VMAX, though. It has 300 hit points and has this super discharge attack. It does 180 for 2 lightning and a colorless. And it also does 20 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. I don't think that's necessarily that strong either. Lightning is already blessed with some great attackers out there right now. And even at the moment, it's not seeing a huge amount of play. So even with like Electro Powers and all that sort of stuff, I don't necessarily see Morpeko VMAX being strong enough. It doesn't have natural synergy with any of the attacks of the Morpeko V. Like, Spark is reasonable, but it's not that insane with Super Discharge, I would say. Hit points are just too high these days for a 20 damage, like, board spread style archetype being that strong. At least from a 3-prize VMAX. I just don't see it being too good. We go down to a Galarian Rapidash, which has an ability that stops status conditions. But I don't think that's all that relevant on stage 1. We have Indeedee V, which is one of those psychic types that I mentioned earlier with the Gengar that can give you a bit of extra healing. Overall, this is like way weaker than things like Celebi. Is it Celebi? No, Shaman that we've had in the past are used in things like Celosaur, because this is a 2-prize Pokemon that is relatively fragile with 180 hit points. So I think naturally this is not going to be all that important unless the Gengar deck is calling out for psychic Pokemon that they can throw all their damage onto, etc. We have some cool Hitmonchans, Hitmonlees, nothing too exciting though. We have Galarian Zigzagoon, which has the Tantrum Head ability. When you play this guy onto your bench, you can put 1 counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Obviously, we have the Fine Band that this kind of competes with in terms of trying to put damage on to set up numbers. Just as a 1-card include in decks, I would naturally say that the Fine Band is probably stronger, but Fine Band, of course, has to compete with other tools, and if decks require other tools, then the Zigzagoon could be a useful card just for being a card that tips over damage, which is nice, as a basic on his own. But it does also have a few evolutions here. Linoon, nothing too important, but the Obstagoon certainly is interesting. It's a 160 hit point stage 2 that has the Violent Shout ability. When you evolve into him, you can put 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So it's Surprise Bite. It's Surprise Bite from Crobat, from Plasma Freeze, Plasma Phantom Forces. From Phantom Forces, my memory is hazy. But I think the archetype really needed Linoon to also have the ability. I think it's way worse that like they've sort of done the flip-flop of the Zubat being better than the Golbat this time around, because 10 and 20 is a big difference, and also the old Zubats all had free retreat, whereas this line doesn't. So as a sort of support role, the evolution line does a worse job, I would say, and hit points are way higher. So I think the Zigzagoon has a good chance of being indexed just because 1 damage sometimes changes games, but I don't think you're going to go all out and fit Obstagoon into your list unless, again, his damage is good enough and you have good enough search for evolution types in general. Like, maybe you're already in evolution deck playing a decent number of rare candies that you can have, like, 2 Zigzagoon and no Linoon and 1 Obstagoon, just a rare candy into him at some point in the game. But ultimately, I think that's a little bit too narrow. It does come with a cool attack. You do 90 for a Dark Colorless, and you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by your opponent's basics. But we're coming into an era, I think, of VMAXs probably going to be controlling the game. I just realized my camera's really high. So I think VMAXs will naturally be a problem for Obstagoon being his own deck. But he could be this sort of awkward card that works in as a tech card just for these decks that are still just going to be tag team based. Like, Mewtwo's not going to just be dead as soon as we see Sword and Shield drop, for example. So maybe his attack is worth looking into. There's a Sableye V here that has 170 hit points as a Dark type 2-prizer. It comes with 2 attacks, or search for a Dark. Allows you to put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. Getting back some resources is always decent, and getting immediate access to them the following turn is pretty decent as well. So it's a decent sort of setup attack, helping you be consistent. It means that you're like guaranteed a supporter card if you played one on the first turn. Helps you get into more ball search. That can be, like I said, a reasonable option for you in the early turns. I don't think this is the face of a controlling style card. It's too fragile as a non-GX, but it could be a nice early game option if you are going to be trying to build around Sableye. And the reason you try and build around it is Wicked Claws. You do 10 plus 60 more for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. That multiplier is scarily dangerous. I think you'd be surprised at how quickly Wicked Claws will be powerful. I think naturally Pokemon are going to try and push you towards playing Obstagoon in the list and Zigzagoons and such, trying to get those counters into play early. Also, there's things like Shrine, which is still decent for any GX decks that are still roaming around. There's also sorts of other attacks we can try and use to put preliminary damage on things while we power up Sableye V. But I think overall, we've seen effects of this attack be pretty bad in previous iterations. Obviously, the 60 multiplier is the most they've ever really pushed this, but I still feel like it'll be below the bar I never really like doing setup damage on things, especially when we have a decent amount of heal in the game. It feels like too many archetypes will be able to undo some of the work that you do just naturally with how their decks progress. We have Drapion, which isn't too great. We have some metal stuff, which also isn't fantastic. Copperager is relatively interesting just because metal has such good support in this set. It's a 190 hit point stage 1, which is pretty mammoth, to be honest. And we have Dig Drain that does 60, and you can heal 30 from yourself, which is meh. But Mighty Trunk does do 220, and if this Pokemon has 8 or more damage counters on it, it does nothing. So you do got to try and keep this man healthy, but if you do, you can be a pretty decent non-GX, obviously tanky in your own right, and you churn out a decent number. 220 is not bad at all, so maybe it's worth trying to build around. I think it's probably just going to be clunkier than the Zacian Zamazenta stuff that you could be rocking with, but certainly a fun non-GX to play around with for sure. We have the Shield counterpart, Zamazenta V here, 230 hit point, 2-prizer that has the Dauntless Shield ability, prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon V Max. Now, Lapras is looking very strong. Snorlax, we will come on to in a moment, looks very strong. I think Stonejourner seems reasonable as well, so having this ability seems very, very good. It also has the Assault Tackle attack that for 2 metal and a colorless does 130, and discards a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. I don't think there are too many relevant special energies around right now, but Weak Guard energies, Rainbow energies, the new Aurora energy, I think it's called. There's a few things that you could be sort of catching. Obviously, Guzma-Hala engines are relatively prevalent in the tag team stuff. Could be annoying for ADP. So it's by no means a useless effect. 130 isn't ideal damage, but this can be again buffed by your own ADP, which is cool. And the best thing about this card really is that Zacian deals with regular basic Pokemon and V Pokemon really well on his own. So Zamazenta helps cover the weakness of Zacian just by walling out V Maxes, which can sometimes just be too powerful for Zacian to deal with. So I think this card is certainly reasonable. Probably a one-of in like a more Zacian-focused build because of its being less proactive and more of a defensive option that naturally needs to come into the game later because it works against evolutions. But I think as V Maxes get stronger, so does Zamazenta. So yeah, seems pretty reasonable. I don't think it's going to be good enough to be a quad Zamazenta deck just yet, but who knows, maybe in a few sets time this will be the new Keldeo if V Maxes are that insane. We'll move on to some of the last cards here. Snorlax, 220 hit point, colorless basic. It has Swallow Up. You can do 60 and heal from this Pokemon the amount you did to your opponent's active. I wouldn't sleep on this 60. I think Snorlax could quite easily be playing Welder, and you can just 60 on 1. 60 on 1 doesn't sound great, but it does knock out some basic Pokemon that are trying to evolve. And I think, importantly, it sets up your Snorlax VMAX, the old G-Max Fall here, that does 60 and 30 more for each of your benched Pokemon. That means you cap out at 210, so that initial 60 does 270, which is good enough for tag teams. So Swallow Up early, like a turn 1 Swallow Up, could certainly be a reasonable option. Healing off any damage that you took in those initial phases, keeping yourself nice and healthy, but that 60 poke can sometimes be very good for you. Falling down does 170 as well, and this guy's asleep. Not too important, but it's going to be what you're using to get through Zamazenta alongside Swallow Up, I guess. But yeah, this Snorlax VMAX, let's go back to him, because 210 for 3 colorless sounds pretty efficient to me. 340 hit points sounds insane to me. And the fact that this is usable with Welder, with Triple Acceleration, with Mally, with all sorts of different ways of getting energies on this guy. Rillaboom I already mentioned as well. So many options to get this guy rolling that there's going to be one that's just good enough, right? I feel like this guy is just very good. 210 is, again, enough to deal with a bunch of V Pokemon. You can try and push that damage with Fine Band or Zigzagoon as well for one-shotting those basic things, and you're easily two-shotting V Maxes. We have a bunch of healing tools available. We have tools to make this guy bulkier with like buff padding or the new charm. So yeah, Snorlax just seems excellent to me. I think he's just a vanilla good card that people will be building around. There's an interesting Noctowl that shuffles one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. And then you also do the same with your own Noctowl and those 3 energies. But if you are playing a triple acceleration style thing, this Noctowl could be strong. It could also be a very scary card in things like Pidgeotto to control. We've seen how often they love to Articuno things just to get rid of a bunch of energies at once. You can try and do it with Noctowl now. If you do like a gusting play, gust their big thing to the bench, you can then use Noctowl 3CE and just get rid of that threat all at once, shuffle it back into your opponent's deck. So yeah, I think this Noctowl is surprisingly scary just because 3CE is a card, and we know that things like Steven's Resolve or a Pidgeotto engine could quite easily make this just like a Ditto Evolution style effect in their deck, just to have that option to get rid of something that's important for your opponent. We have Oranguru. It's a 120 hit point basic that has the ability Ape Wisdom. Man, they do love giving Oranguru good cards. Once during a turn, you may switch a card from your hand with the top card of your deck. I think this is a secretly busted ability. I really do think there's amazing synergies here, and I think in general gameplay, he's still a good ability to have on boards. When you're digging for things, just in general, if you like miss off your supporter, Ape Wisdom gives you a 1 extra card dig to see 1 more option. If you're just about to use a Dene GX, you can protect a card from your hand and make sure you draw it next turn. Maybe that's a spare welder that you've just drawn into. Maybe it's one of your custom catchers, which are going to be coming back into the game in a big way just because of V Pokemon, I think. You can protect that before you use Dede Change, then just draw straight back into that card. Especially good with custom catchers. Like if you're going for a Dede Change looking to get customs for game or something, and you're holding on to 1, you can just guarantee that that's in the draw, and then you have 5 draws to find the other piece, which is crazy good. It has synergy with Jirachi, Prism Star, Mr. Mime combo, if you're feeling very spicy. But I think it's also got excellent synergy with Magcargo. We've seen Magcargo Instruct be a previous combo alongside each other. Now we have Magcargo Ape Wisdom as a combo to smooth over, get the best card you want at the right time, then just Ape Wisdom straight into it. So yeah, I think this card is overall very good, and will find many niches because he is a decent non-GX just to help consistency throughout the entire game. And yeah, that will wrap things up for the cards from Sword and Shield. Let me know what you think are the best Pokemon in the set. Did I get anything wrong? Obviously, these are still first impressions. Still, translations could be wrong. I may have read something incorrectly as well. That's always an option. But yeah, let me know if you're hyped for... Well, let me know what archetypes you're hyped for from the set. Obviously, this isn't going to be the only batch of cards that we get. The Sword and Shield expansion for us is like 200-something plus cards. So this is just a handful of the things that we will be getting overall. But I think it's a really good start. I think there's some super interesting stuff here. We're being spoon-fed some awesome archetypes already. And I think there's plenty more to come as well. So I'll hear all your thoughts down below about Sword and Shield. What are your top 3 Pokemon? What are your top 3 trainer cards? What do you think's broken? What do you think's overhyped? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. And I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.